Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for Empowered for Balance. My name is Brew, your Life Balance Strategist. And today we're going to talk about brain health, how we can maximize the efficiency of our brain and allow our brains to function efficiently and at its optimum level. And to help me to do this, I have Dr. Nicole Byers joining me all the way from Canada. But before we go on, have you subscribed yet? Please hit the subscribe button because that is how you're going to get notifications every week when we upload new episodes. Hi, Dr. Byers. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Yep. And I'm excited we can have this conversation today. Yep. So let's, first of all, introduce yourself. Who are you? Where do you live? What do you do? Everything about you.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Dr. Nicole Byers. I live in Calgary, Canada, which is close to the mountains. If you're not super familiar with Canada, there's still some snow outside, but not too much. So it's warming up here, which is fantastic. Yes, my background is in neuroscience. I'm what's called a neuropsychologist by training, which is really just a fancy word for a psychologist who specializes in brain health. So
Yeah.
that's really where I got started in my career. I went to school for a really long time, and then I spent a number of years working in hospitals, mostly with people who had had illnesses or injuries that might have impacted their brain health. And after
Yeah.
working there for some time, what I noticed was a lot of people were coming in and they were struggling with things like their thinking felt foggy, they were having trouble concentrating and trouble with memory, but they were
Mm-hmm.
they were healthy. So there's nothing wrong with their brain. And I started to spend a lot of time speaking with these individuals. And what I found was that folks were really struggling with burnout and
Yeah.
overwhelm and stress, and that was impacting their thinking efficiency. So that's really what got me interested in this whole area of how our brains and bodies are connected and how
Mm-hmm.
to change our lives and some of our habits to improve our thinking efficiency day to
Yeah,
day.
yeah. And I like what you do because I feel like you bring the science in what I do. So, yeah, I'm sure you know I talk a lot about burnout also. So,
Yes.
I'm super excited about our conversation today. So, first of all, I've had a lot of clients show up and they're talking about mommy brain. Oh, I also complain of that sometimes. Oh, I have brain fog. I can't even think straight. I keep forgetting, you know. So, how does that come about? Let's give a little bit of a background about how all this brain inefficiencies and brain fog and faulty thinking and all that comes up.
Sure. How I like to describe it is your brain only has so many resources, and lots of things pull from those
Mm,
resources. So if you're a new mom and you have a new baby and baby's not sleeping through the night, that's going to
yeah.
pull away your brain resources. It's hard to think clearly and remember things when we're tired. But
Yep.
not just the fatigue, also, if you're a mom and a new mom and there's a lot going on, right? Like you're worried about this tiny human and you're learning all these new things and you're trying to keep everything straight and you might be trying to balance work on top of that, and all of these things pull from our resources. So by the end of the day, when we're making all these decisions, we're trying to get all these tasks done and we're tired on top of it, it's really tough to be efficient in our thinking. Those
Yeah.
resources are used up and we make mistakes, we feel foggy or slow, or we're not focusing. And that's really what results in that feeling of fog and thinking difficulties.
Yeah. So, how can we, or what are some strategies to improve our brain health and to help us think efficiently?
Yeah, really great question. So, one strategy I always recommend for everyone, regardless of what stage of life you're in, is try to make as many of your daily decisions as automatic as possible. And I know sometimes when we talk about automation, we think about things like using technology or setting up
Mhm.
reminders, and that's all really great too. But even when it comes to brain health and efficiency, making those day to day tasks as easy as possible. Here's some examples to explain what I mean. So, some things that I do is every night before I go to bed, I lay out my clothes for the next
Yeah.
day. I pick out my outfit all the way down to like my socks and my undies, and I have them all laying out. And the reason I do that is I am not a morning person at all. Mornings are not my thing. My thinking is super slow when I first get up. So I know that if I got up in the morning and had to pick what I wanted to wear, I would stand there for like 20 minutes staring at my closet thinking, I have nothing to wear. I hate all my clothes.
Yeah.
And by the time I even got dressed, I'm tired, right? Because my brain's having to make all these decisions first thing in the morning. So for me, picking out what I want to wear the night before is a way to make that small decision of what to wear more automatic. So one less
Yeah.
thing I have to think about, more resources to do the things that matter day to day.
Yeah. 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 Wow.
And so that's
Wow.
something we can carry throughout our day too, right? And really it is, usually what I recommend is take a look at what you're doing all day and where can you make things as easy as possible, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
laying out your clothes the night before, I pack my lunch the night before, I take the same route to work every day. All these little things are easier decisions for our brain to make.
Yeah.
And when we're making those decisions efficient and easier, it means we have more resources and energy left over for the hard things, like that
Yeah.
complicated work project or that colleague,
Yeah.
the conversation you're having to have.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that makes a lot of sense because I think that maybe sometimes we are, you know, putting in too much effort over things that shouldn't be prioritized.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Which actually is a great segue to my next strategy, which is all
Yeah,
about prioritizing. And I totally
yeah,
agree that is so important. And something that I see a lot of folks struggle with is, they come in and they sit down in front of me and they say, Nicole, I feel so stressed out. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so tired all the time. And then they start walking me through their day and they have 3 kids and they're getting them up and they're getting them to school and they're making their lunches and then they're answering work emails at the same time. And then they're driving to work and they're go, go, go all day. And they come home and they get their family organized and they go to a million activities. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm exhausted just listening to
yeah,
this, right? And they have these
yeah.
giant, we make these giant lists of all these things that we want to get done, right? I
Yep.
know I am bad for this too. I am totally an overachiever and my list is way too long. I'm always working on pruning that. But that's exactly what happens is we struggle to prioritize and we make these lists and in our brain we're thinking all of this stuff is equally important. I have to get these 100 things done when that's not actually the case. More often than not, there are a few activities on that list that really have to
Yeah,
happen and the rest of it is bonus, right?
yeah.
And so if we can prioritize and we can find those few things that really make a difference and say, the rest of this is good to get to but not essential, we feel less guilty, we're less mad at
Mm-hmm.
ourselves at the end of the day, less stressed, which means more resources for thinking.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. True, true. And I think I'm guilty of that also.
Yeah, I think we all are.
Yeah. Especially when you have to plan for, other people, when you have kids and all that. So, yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So the more that we can, make things efficient, we can prune down that to-do list, we can focus on what
Yeah.
really makes a difference. These are all less things we have to think about. And, if we always keep in mind, my brain only has so many resources. If I'm trying to think about these 400 tasks that I'm trying to do at once, that's
Mm-hmm.
really overwhelming for our
Yeah,
brains, right? It
that's
can get
true.
really hard. And, another strategy I recommend is trying to reduce that mental and physical clutter in our lives to
Yeah.
improve our efficiency. So if I am sitting here at work and I'm trying to, have this conversation with you, but I'm thinking about, okay, as soon as I'm done this, I have to finish this project and then I have to send that email and then I have to do this thing and then I have to do that thing. That's draining our
Yeah.
efficiency. Our brains are
Yeah.
actually not very good at multitasking.
Mm-hmm.
We like to think we can multitask, but we really can't. And what we do is we jump, our brains jump back and forth between the two tasks really fast. So if I am
Yeah.
trying to have a conversation with you and I'm trying to, send an email at the same time, I'm not really focusing very well on each of those
Yeah.
tasks, right? And that drains those resources. So anything that we can do to reduce that mental clutter can be really helpful.
Mm.
One simple strategy I recommend is I do this myself. I always have a notepad next to me when I'm working.
Yeah.
And when I start to think about that other stuff, I write it down. So I'm
Yep.
not thinking about it
Yeah.
anymore. Is that something that you find helpful for folks
Yeah.
too?
I call it my brain dump.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
It really
helpful, right?
helps. Yeah, it does. Because especially when you're managing different things, being a mom, being a business owner, being a wife, having so many things to do. Sometimes, again, like you said, you want to think about everything. So for me, I have a board up here. And, anytime it shows up, I just put it on the board, and then when
Nice.
I can get to it, I can get to it. At least I know I'm not going to forget. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And that's a great strategy because that's exactly what our brains are trying not to do, right? When they're bringing all these things up and they're like, oh, yeah, remember, I need to do this. Remember, I need to do that. They're
Yeah.
trying not to forget, but that actually uses up a ton of our resources because
True.
in the back of our mind, we're trying to think about all of these things. So if we write it down in a notebook or up on a board, it's one less thing that your brain has to think about. And it means you can come back to focusing.
Yeah.
It's super normal to have those thoughts when we're working. Our brain, makes lots of weird connections when we're working on tasks. So sometimes things come up, right? We think about
Yeah.
another project or we're like, oh, here's a great solution for that task, which is awesome. But the problem is if we follow that train of thought and let us distract us, it can really pull us off
Yeah.
task. So if you're thinking of like this other solution to a work project and then you move away and start working on this, you're not getting anything done. And
Sure.
especially I find this is hard when we're tired and when we're
Mm-hmm.
fatigued and our brains are really easily pulled off track. I know earlier this week I had a few nights of not great sleep. I had like an appointment that went later than I thought. I was up late one
Mm-hmm.
night and then, my daughter, she's 3, she wasn't sleeping really well. And I was sitting here Thursday afternoon and I was like, man, I can't seem to stay focused on one task, right? And I
Yeah.
kept getting distracted by all of those things. And I was trying to use all my strategies and I'm writing stuff down, but I kept getting pulled away. And by the end of the day, I sit there and I look at what I actually accomplished. And I'm like, man, I didn't really check anything off because I kept getting pulled. So
Mm.
sleep is another really important
Yeah.
strategy for the health of our
Mm.
brain for many reasons. That being one of them is that when we're tired, when we're fatigued, it is really tough to concentrate.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I can agree with you more because sleep is, I think our sleep is that's the only way your brain can rest, right?
Totally.
So yeah, that's true.
Absolutely. And there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of important kind of brain processes and body processes that occur while we sleep. Our brain actually forms new memories while we're
Yeah.
sleeping. There's, lots of research that if you're studying, for example, and then you go to take a nap, you remember it better because your brain has that chance to process all that information, right? To make those connections, to think. And
Mm.
I'm sure most of us have had that experience of we go and have a nap or we have a good sleep and we wake up with this brilliant idea, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh man, I couldn't think about this
Yep.
yesterday. Yeah. And just
Yep.
giving our brain that chance to recuperate, to refresh, to heal our body, to make those connections is so important. But sleep is often the first thing we cut, right? We're
That's
like, I'm just going to
true.
stay up a little bit later today, or like, I'll just get up a little bit earlier for a few days. And for a few days, we can totally handle it. If there's an emergency project or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
our brains can deal with that. But the problem is, a few days usually doesn't end at a few days.
Yeah.
And then it's been weeks or months and we're not getting enough sleep and our bodies and our brains just start to wear. And, even something as simple as trouble coming up with the words that we want to use, we're stumbling over what we want
Yeah.
to say. All these things are
Mm-hmm.
really impacted by sleep.
Yeah. 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 So true. And it's funny because everything that you're saying sounds so familiar, especially when you're a new mom.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I don't even know really how I got through the first
Yeah.
year. So moms are amazing. Let's just give
Yeah.
that disclaimer. And there are
True.
definitely there's some biological processes that help us get through that time. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
I went back to work and my daughter wasn't sleeping through the night yet. And I was like, how did I do that? Right.
Yeah.
So props to any mom out there that is doing this. But again, the problem is when we let that stretch on too long.
Yeah.
And
That's
when we're
true.
still, years later, we're still not getting enough sleep and our brains are really fatigued and we're trying to do more and more and more, thinking that by just working forever, we're going to get to the end of that to-do list, which isn't really what happens. Usually more stuff just comes in to fill that
True.
time,
That
right?
is
So
true.
if you're struggling with your thinking right now, if your memory is not feeling great, if you're struggling with your words, check your sleep. That's a great place to start. Are you getting
Yeah.
7 to 9 hours? That's what we recommend. And that's like real sleep, right? That's not like
Yeah.
laying in bed and watching Netflix or reading or playing on your phone. That's like real sleep that needs to
Mm.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. We need to pause and at least recuperate at some point. Because like you said, going, 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 and then 5 years, your kids are 10 and you're still doing it. 15 years, you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, is this really me?
Right.
Because you can't even recognize yourself anymore.
Yeah. And then you really start to feel burnt out, right? And,
Yeah.
again, in terms of our brains only having so many resources. So when I'm tired and I start to feel burnt out and I start to feel stressed, all those things are taking away those resources from my brain. It is all stuff that is pulling away my energy, my thinking power, and it
Yeah.
just makes it even harder. And then we get into this cycle, right? Of like,
Mm,
well, now I'm making mistakes. Now I'm not doing my best work. Well, I better just stay up and I better skip lunch and I better keep doing all these things. And actually, it's not a great long-term solution.
yeah. 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 I agree. Self-care is important.
So important. Yeah. And I know
Yep.
you and I have talked about this before. You were on my
Yeah.
podcast a few months
Yeah.
ago here. And
Yeah.
really self-care is also so important for our brain health.
Yeah.
And we know there's a ton of research that things like, getting enough sleep, we already talked about, but also doing things that you like to do that keep your brain active can actually help
Yeah.
you live longer. It can improve your memory, whether that's hobbies, reading, spending time with
Mm-hmm.
family and friends. All of these activities actually improve your brain health. So it's not just, self-care to take care of, I don't know, to feel like I'm
Yeah.
doing something good, but it also
Yeah.
actually improves your health, right? Like
Yep.
this is
Yep.
actually important for our brains, and we need to
Yeah.
be making sure we have the time to do that. And what I say is think about fueling your minds and
Yeah.
your body. Anything that fuels those
Mm-hmm.
resources, whether that's again things that you like to do, hobbies, spending time with friends and family,
Yeah.
relaxation, exercise. All of these
Yep.
things are great for a healthy brain.
Yep. Yep. Very true. I agree with you 200%.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we all know these things, right? It's
That's
not that
the
we don't
thing.
know, like we know these are important. It's trying to find the time to do
Yeah.
them. And one thing that I try to keep in mind, because like I said, I am so bad for burning the candle at both ends, and I'm a perfectionist and an overachiever, and I am go, go, go all the time. And then usually, and I think this is common for a lot of us, is we kind of have to hit that wall. And then we
Mm,
say, oh man, something has to change, right? Like
yeah.
I said earlier this week, had that afternoon where I really wasn't being productive. And I was like, okay, that's a cue for my brain to say, like, I need to take a step back
Yeah.
here. Something is wrong. For me, it was sleep. I know it was sleep. So I've been prioritizing that the past
Mm,
few days again, and I'm starting to feel back on track. But if you're noticing that you're forgetful, that you're stumbling over what you want to say, you can't concentrate, that's probably a cue that your brain is giving you that something is out of whack. And,
true.
taking a look at our lives and where all of that stress on your brain might be coming from is a great place to start.
Yeah, that's true. So that's the if I understand you, then pausing and analyzing your life to see where the stresses are coming from and where you're overdoing it is very important.
Totally. And like I said,
Yeah.
half the time we don't even know that we're that overloaded, right? We're
Yes.
we're doing all these things and it just feels normal. That's what we've always been doing, but it takes a moment to take a step back, whether that's even sometimes saying that stuff out loud, right? Like if
Mm,
I look at my task list and I read all this stuff out loud and my brain's like, "Okay, actually Nicole, like that's not reasonable. You're never going to get this
yeah.
done," or running it by a friend or a coworker or someone that you trust of like, is this reasonable for me to be doing right now, can be a great sounding board.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And I love everything you're talking about. And it's funny because I think that a lot of this also stems from we women trying so hard to please everybody and trying so hard to live up to that standard that society has set for us. So, how can we stop caring what people say? How can we get to that place where it's not that we're being self-centered, but we are not so concerned about what other people say. And so that allows us to make the best decisions for us and our wellness.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I absolutely agree with you. I think this is a struggle, especially for women. I'm sure men struggle with it too, but I see a lot
Yeah.
of women struggling with this, of that pressure from kind of that inner people pleaser or that inner
Yeah.
perfectionist, right? That's like,
Yeah.
that's so worried about what everyone else is thinking all the time. And again, if we come back to brain resources, that takes up a lot of energy. If I'm thinking, if I say this, what's that person going to think? Or what's that person going to say? Or how's that person going to react? Or am I going to upset someone? That's all stuff that's taking up space in the back of my mind and makes it really tough to focus, really tough to
Yeah.
concentrate on what we do. And some of that, to be fair to our brains, is a little bit of an adaptation that our brain has learned over time, right? We want people to like us. It makes it easier to work well on teams. Our brains like when we're happy. And so we get into this pattern or these habits of kind of changing who we are, maybe not speaking up how we want to, not doing the things that we want to say or do, because we're worried about how that might impact things over the long run. And again, at a basic level, that makes sense. The problem is that it holds us back and creates all this stress and worry. One thing that I find really helpful and helpful for others too is to keep in mind, I know you talk about that idea of superwoman syndrome, and I love that as well, of that, I can't save the world when I'm not taking care of myself, right? If I am so worried about what everyone else thinks and it's taking up all this energy and I'm doing all this stuff to please other people, what's going to happen is my body and my brain is going to say, enough is enough. And sometimes that can be really significant health complications, right? We see things like chronic stomach problems from all of that stress, chronic headaches and tension, and all of these things that can come from trying to please everyone and to be the best and be perfect all the time. And then what happens is our bodies kind of throw up that white flag and say, no more, right? And then I'm not there for my family. I'm not there for my colleagues. I'm not there for my community because my body has burnt out. And so taking that perspective sometimes can be really helpful of like, I actually can't do these amazing things that I want to do if I'm not taking care of my mind and my body first.
Yeah, that's true. And it's funny because sometimes when I talk to people, they think I'm just trying to sell them because I'm a burnout coach and and I'm like, no, because it's real, and it can get worse because then you go into things like adrenaline fatigue and, hormonal imbalance, excessive cortisol, all these things are affecting us. So I think it's very true. Not focusing on what people say and realizing that you cannot be superwoman and you cannot save the world. And you can't give the best to the world if you are stressed out and burnt out. So if the hope is to be good to everybody, then you're actually not really being good by trying to please everybody and overstretching yourself.
Absolutely. And another thing that I try to remind myself of too is, there are over 7 billion people on this planet, right? Not everyone's going to like what I have to say. I don't like everyone I meet, right? Most people don't, we don't all mesh together. Not everyone's going to agree with me all the time. I don't agree with everyone all the time. And that's okay. It's okay that we don't all agree all the time. It is okay that not everyone likes us, and learning to accept that that's a reality. And that, like you said, if we're trying to make everyone like us, we end up just making this like toned down, bland version of who we are that creates all that inner stress and turmoil, like you said, and that's no fun, right?
I agree. And what about people, again, sometimes maybe this thing has been stemming from childhood. How do you work with people in that sense and helping them overcome maybe this thing, again, culture? They've been trained to feel like they need to be that way. And so they've been trying so hard to live up to that. And because of that, they can't even be themselves. And they're trying so hard to please people. And so sometimes when I talk to people, I realize there's a deeper thing going on. It's not just about telling them not to care, but there's a rewiring of the brain that needs
absolutely.
to be done.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Do you have any strategies for that?
Yeah. And, really the best thing to do is keep in mind that, we've learned these beliefs and these patterns of behavior for years, right? Like if we're in our 30s or our 40s or our 50s, like our brain has had 50 years of practice thinking this way, thinking that I need to pay attention to what everyone else thinks. I need to worry about hurting other people. And it's going to take time to unlearn those beliefs. And really, just like any habit or any skill, the best way for us to learn is through taking those small baby steps. And
like that.
one thing I like to work on with folks is I call it a confidence ladder. There are lots of different terms for this, but basically at the bottom is where you are right now. And it's worrying about what everyone else is thinking, being afraid to speak up, being afraid to take chances. And at the top is where I want to be, whatever that is. I want to be able to give a presentation at work, or I want to be able to have that tough conversation that I've been avoiding, or I want to be able to speak up more. And then thinking of each rung on the ladder as like a baby step, to build that confidence. So, what's one
Yeah.
small thing that I could do to challenge that belief my brain's learning? What's one small thing that scares me a little bit that I can start doing? And each time we do those confidence building activities, our brain is learning new habits, just like learning
Yeah.
to ride a bike, right? You
Yep.
start with training wheels, then you have someone help you, and then you take the training
Mm-hmm.
wheels off, and eventually you're up and down all the hills. Works the same way for building that self-confidence.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. Starting small and growing it. Sometimes as high achieving women, we want to just start and day one we are there, like a
Totally.
magic wand. So
Yes. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And so
yeah,
recognizing that that's exactly what you're doing is you're rewiring your brain, you're unlearning years of habits that have gotten you to this point, and that's not going to change overnight. But our brain is really, really good at learning. It just takes that practice and that repetition.
yeah, true. So practice one step at a time. I love this. So let's talk a little bit about coronavirus. A lot of women are stuck at home trying to work from home. They have their kids. It's very overwhelming and things are
Absolutely.
very uncertain at this point. So what do you have to tell that woman out there who is struggling? She's burnt out, but she has no choice at this point because she needs to take care of her kids and she has to, some of us have to homeschool. So what would you tell that woman, some strategies for her to cope?
Sure. Something that can be really helpful and we can do it really quickly is to just take a few minutes to focus on your breathing. And the reason I
Yeah.
recommend that as a good place to start is that when we get really overwhelmed and we get really tense, our breathing actually changes. We start to take really shallow breaths. We start to get really tense in our shoulders. They start to creep up to our ears. And that means that, not enough oxygen is getting throughout our body, not enough is getting to our brain. It can increase that feeling of overwhelm. So even
Yeah.
taking, 5 minutes, sit down, close your eyes, put one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and take some deep breaths. And while you're doing that, try to keep the hand on your chest as still as possible and move that one on your stomach as much as possible. That's how we know we're taking those really deep belly breaths that are going to
Yeah.
relax our body. Because, like I said, our brains are great in so many ways, but they can really get us into these negative spirals. And so when
Yeah.
we're feeling overwhelmed, when I'm like, oh my gosh, I have my kids to homeschool, I have all these deadlines, I'm trying to do this at home, like everyone's coming at me all the time, our brain gets into this really heightened state of stress and it makes it
Yeah.
really tough to make those decisions. So if we can calm our body, take those few minutes, just, even just a couple minutes to take some deep breaths to relieve some of that stress on the brain, that can reduce some of that stress and overwhelm.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. Breathing is a very good one. I like that. Awesome. So where can we find you, Dr. Byers?
Best place is probably my website. It's drnicolebyers.com.
Yeah. And your podcast?
Yes, I have a podcast as well. It's called The Bold Life. You've been on there
Yeah.
before. Fantastic guest. So there's a link to the podcast on my website as well. And I have a number of free resources up on there. I have a quiz that's really fun. People can take to learn about
Hmm.
how their unique personality impacts how they respond to stress, because we all have different styles and approaches when it comes
Yeah.
to our lives. And so understanding a little bit more about how we approach, stress, problem solving, our daily activities can make it easier to set those priorities, and be able to think through, what are some good strategies for me for managing my
Yeah.
stress right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. What are your last words for us?
My last thoughts would be just keep in mind that your brain resources are limited. And the more that
Yeah.
you can do to start with a full cup, whether that's taking care of your mind and body and prioritizing those resources throughout the day, is how we reduce that overwhelm.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And thank you so much for taking time off your busy schedule to talk to us today. I
You're
really
very welcome.
appreciate this. Yeah. And on that note, thank you so much for sticking with us till the end. Dr. Byers has said a lot, but for me, my biggest take home is that we need to prioritize because not everything is important in the moment. So that brain dump, we have to keep that brain dump, write things down when they pop up in our brain so that we can focus more on what is more important in the present moment. And before we go, I just want to extend an invitation to you. If you find that you're stressed out, you're overwhelmed, you're burnt out, and your productivity level is low, please Sign up for a free strategy session with me by going to www.empoweredforbalance.com/free session. And in that free session, we're going to talk about what's going on with you, what your challenges are, and what you need to do to move forward, and get closer to that vision of a more productive, purposeful, and fulfilled life. Again, my name is Amma Brew, your life balance strategist. And before I go, I just want to remind you that a true empowered woman lives a balanced life. I hope to see you next week. Take care.